Hello, Sarah Sabin, executive and team coach here in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I'm thrilled to have with me here today Alejandro Perez, who is the Chief Innovation Officer of Komet Sales. Alejandro, welcome to the show. And could you briefly introduce yourself to my audience?
Hey, Sarah. Thank you for having me here. Sure. So, like you said, I'm the founder and the chief innovation officer at Komet Sales. Started this business about Komet Sales. The company started about 20 years ago. The business, this particular business, Komet Sales, it started about 13 years ago. What we ended up building is a software that vertically integrates the floral supply chain. A very niche market. But yeah, that's kind of what I do. And now, and we'll talk more about this later on in the interview. But 6 months ago, a year ago, I got a partner, private equity firm in New York, and then 6 months ago, we got a new CEO, and man, it's been phenomenal, like transformationally phenomenal. So happy to dig into it as we chat.
That is interesting, and I would like to dive into that because often the founder or founders that start a business are not necessarily the ones to be the CEO of that business 5 or 10 years into the business journey. So a different profile of person is often needed to take the company to the next level. So I'd love for you to tell me more about that journey, how you came to the realization that you wanted to bring in a CEO.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it all started when I was doing the diligence with the new partner that I found in New York. Talking with one of the founders of the fund. He casually mentioned one day, like, "Hey, Alejandro, what would you think if we decided later on down the road to consider bringing in an external CEO?" And of all the questions that I had thought about and prepared and stuff like that, that question had not passed my mind. So when that question, came in, what I did is I immediately hit the pause on the time, and I went into my background, and I kind of drew on the wall and said, "Hey, you know what? It makes sense. There's something called the Peter Principle, where people get promoted up until the level where they become incompetent, and it's like." It's like you were saying before, it's a different skill set. So something I realized for me as the founder of the business, getting to a point where we are, when I did the transaction, I had about 90 employees, and we were thinking about making some acquisitions and all these different things. It's a different mindset, and my mindset, I bootstrapped the business. So it's like, that's my mindset. Now that we're getting to a point where we need to scale, it all makes sense. So what I do with my life is I believe in something until I find or somebody presents a new piece of information. And when that information makes sense, I'm ready to flip on a dime. That's it. So it's like, so think about it this way. Even though I had never considered that option, the moment that option was brought to my attention, I realized that was the best option that I had. So of course I told, one of the co-founders of the fund, like, "Hey man, I'm game." Because at the end of the day, it's all about how do we generate the most value for the shareholders of the business, including myself. And I realized that bringing in an external CEO was the way to go. Now, 6 months went by, we interviewed a couple of people, and then I ended up, meeting, Chris Beals, who's our current CEO, and, we just hit it off like that, great background, great fit, mentally, culturally, all these different things. And then he started, first week of May, so almost 6 months ago. And it's been, and I'll tell you something, it's been the best thing that's happened to me in the world, because we're team players. And then it's like Chris comes in, and it's like, he's our CEO, and my job is to back up our CEO. And of course, I'm there providing advice. And if I see that we're gonna do something that I feel that for the industry, for the business, it could be detrimental, I'll raise my hand. But for the most part, it's been just the best thing that I've done in my life.
I want to acknowledge as well your openness to that suggestion, because what I see is sometimes that brings up a lot of defensiveness, which comes from insecurity, not being
ego
anymore. But
of course,
it's interesting that you were like, I don't see something until I see it, but once I see it, then I'm prepared to change.
If it makes sense, it makes sense, and that's the whole point. I mean, life is nothing more than a journey that you're discovering. I'm in constant exploration every single day of my life, and I'm exploring different things. What I eat, how I work out, who I deal with, the relationships, all, mental models, all these different things. And when opportunities present, it's what happens is people get tied up. So I'll give you my personal philosophy on this. So imagine that your title is like a uniform, right? So if I'm a person and I have a title, then I'm wearing the uniform. But here's the deal. when the person in the title start merging and you become like too tight, envision this. My uniform starts to stick to my skin, right? So now my uniform and myself, they're again, they're blended. So now a new CEO comes in and I have to take off my uniform. You know how painful that's going to be? It's gonna, as I take off my uniform, it's ripping my skin off. So not only is it going to be painful, but I'm going to have scars, and it's going to take who knows how many days, weeks, months, or years to heal. And then when you give it away, suddenly you're naked. You're hurt and you're naked in the middle of nowhere. Again, feeling cold, feeling whatever, unprotected because you don't have a uniform. So that's one option. Or the other option is like, hey, I am who I am as a person, as a human being, as an individual. And it so happens to be that for the last 13 years, I've been wearing the CEO uniform. Now, I see an opportunity that if a new person comes in, and you know what I do? Not only do I take off my uniform, but before I take off my uniform, I go and I say, listen, before I give you my uniform, let me make sure that I measure this so that it fits perfectly. And then once I get the uniform, I go like, by the way, did you know that inside there's a secret pocket? And by the way, there's all these things that, there's all these things that you can do. So suddenly I give him my uniform and I just got like a white robe and I just wear it on top of it. And life goes on. It's that simple. But you have to be mentally prepared to let go. And one of the hardest things, I think that, it's something that I thought about thoroughly, and it has to do with letting go, is when you make this transition, you go from being the go-to person. I used to get, 200 emails, 300 emails a day, Slack messages, phone calls, WhatsApps, you name it, customers, vendors, everything. It's like a never-ending barrage of things, that are happening on a day-to-day. And don't get me wrong, I love that, right? But then suddenly when you relinquish that title and you give it to somebody else, you realize that 2 weeks later, you go from getting 200, 300 emails a day to maybe getting 10 emails a day or 20 emails a day. And most of those are like CC, like, hey, just FYI, they're not even directly. So if you're not mentally prepared, for that, I guess that you can get depressed, because what happens is like, oh my God, like I went from being like the top person to being nobody. So there's two ways to frame it. So one is that, or the other one is like, hey, I went from being the person having this role, and now I have a different role and I add value in a very different way. And to me, it's been one of the best experiences of my life, because I've been a hustler for 20 years, like doing all these different things, trying different things, starting different business, going out of business, trying different things, like basically surviving for the first, I'm going to say, of my 20-year journey with my business, the first 10 years were basically based on survival. It's like the best analogy that I can give you is like I'm floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, hanging from a log, and every now and then your head goes under the water, and it's like you're there, and you're not sure if you're going to survive. And again, it's not like a couple of hours. No. It's a decade, decade plus. I mean, that was my path. So, anyways, it's been a phenomenal change. And then also, it's been also fun having somebody, taking whatever you created, whatever you built, and seeing that person kind of like building on top of the base that you built. And now you say like, hey, not only are we gonna build a 100-story building, but we're building it pretty fast and on top of a very solid foundation. So it's so from my side, it's very exciting. But then again, you have to be mentally prepared, because if not, I think that it could become something terrible. Again, if you don't address it the right way, that's the way that I think about it.
Yeah, and I think if I was to summarize what you're saying, you have to be prepared for that identity change as you're going along your journey, because essentially,
absolutely,
if you cling to that identity can sink you. I suppose.
Of course.
To use your sea analogy, if you were out at sea wearing a suit of armor, then it's
gonna take you to the bottom. Imagine hanging from the log with a suit of armor, and then somebody goes like, give it to me. It's like, no, I'm too stuck with it. No, it doesn't make any sense. So it's like I guess that the moral of the story is you need to let go, and I'm good at letting go. Like again, in the last 5 years, I think that I've been through 4 different houses, and my wife wakes up one day and says like, hey, you know what? I think that we should move someplace else. And I go like, sure, if you find another place, we'll move. And I don't know, like in 2 occasions, we've had that conversation, say on a Wednesday, and Saturday of the following week, we're moving to a different place. I mean, and I got, 3 kids, and it's like a lot, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, life is about change, and again, letting go. When you don't let go, everything becomes a burden. I mean, even the again, the relationships that you have to people change. When you're not the CEO, it's like, oh, you're not the go-to person anymore. So it's like, if like I said before, like if the title, if as a person you value yourself, I don't know, X, and your title is 10X, then when you lose your title, then you're 10X, you feel like you're 10X less. But in my case, if as a person I'm 10X and my title is X, then when I lose the title, it's like, hey man, I enjoyed having the title, but now I'm enjoying being myself, the same human being that had that title. So it's a different approach. Anyways, it's just I guess it's a philosophical, way of seeing life.
Yes, it is. But again, to summarize, change is inevitable. You might as well start loving that change instead of hating it. And also,
of course,
you are not your title. And you've brought some great analogies to the table with the uniform and, and the being out at sea to describe that as well. So Alejandro, based on where you currently are, you've got this CEO in place. Is there anything in particular that's keeping you up at night at the moment?
Not really. I mean, as the CEO comes in, we're going through some transformational changes. I'll give you an example. Let's say we had implemented the 4-day week a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, and now as we're acquiring more companies. It's like having the 4-day week becomes an issue, because if you have a new company that we acquired and they're on a 5-day week schedule, and we're like on a 4-day week schedule, but they're not ready to move to 4-day weeks. Suddenly you can't have it's the same company now, right? So you can't really have, or we're finding it hard to have like different members of teams having like if you're a developer, you have 4-day weeks, but if you're a customer support, you have a 5-day week. It just generates like this. Like if I was on the other side of the 5-day week, I would be like, hey, I feel like I'm a second-class citizen as opposed to the other team members that are like first-class citizens. So that's kind of like one of the major challenges that we have as we bring in other companies. How do we make sure that our culture keeps evolving in a way that's positive for everybody that's involved? And it's hard, because like this week we have somebody from our team, and it's been a hard sell, moving from the 4-day week to the 5-day week. But then at the end of the day, you have to think big picture, and then you also have to think like, why do we go to the 4-day week? And the reason being is like 2-3 years ago, the competitiveness in the development landscape was just brutal, and we're primarily based. Most of the team is based in Medellin, in Colombia, and we have people scattered all over the world, but most of the team is based in Medellin. Well, actually in Colombia, and all these companies from the States, from Europe, came to Colombia, and they were hiring people and paying like these crazy salaries. So suddenly you realize like you can't compete head to head with these companies that are, I don't know, Globant, and they're like a vendor to Google, and they employ, I don't know, like 2,000 people in Medellin, and they pay like these crazy salaries. Can you compete head to head with them? No, you can't. So then as an entrepreneur, you have to be creative. That's what I love about entrepreneurship. That creativity is your best, it's the best group of tools that you have in your toolbox. So what we ended up doing is we said, hey, we can't compete with salaries, but we can compete with some other things. Boom. In this case, some additional benefits and culture and all these different things. And it worked as well. But then again, yesterday we had a meeting with the exec team, and I was sharing like, hey, I just see switching from the 4-day week to the 5-day week as one of the thousands of problems that we've overcome in the past. We just need to become creative about it. We just need to, have a hard conversation. It's not easy because people get very emotionally attached. But you have a honest conversation. You're thinking big picture. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? Where do we want to go? And is that dream that we're pursuing worth us making some changes so that we can actually get there? And the answer is absolutely yes. So the question is, mechanically, how do you make that change? And that's kind of like what we're doing right now. So that's one of those things that, I don't think that it keeps me up at night, but it's one of those things that I'm actually actively thinking about, currently.
And I want to draw attention to the fact that culture does evolve. So, over time, it will change as more people come in, it will change as you scale, but the core values might not change. But how it manifests might.
Think about it this way. So it's like if I was to use an analogy for culture, imagine that culture is a garden, right? So it's like you plant your garden, right? Boom. And it's like It could be a Japanese style garden. It could be, I don't know, like a Bali style garden. It could be whatever type of garden you want to have, right? And then once you plant the garden, you have to maintain the garden, because if you can spend a lot of money planting a very nice garden, but if you don't have a gardener or somebody taking care of the garden, eventually it's going to get rowdy. It's going to go out of control. It's going to start, like things are going to pop up and maybe they're not aligned. So you need to be maintaining that garden. But then on the same token, maybe you visit my garden and you say, hey, Alejandro, a couple of palm trees, next to these, little trails would look phenomenal. And I might say, hey, Sarah, that's a phenomenal idea. Let's get some palm trees. Boom, boom, boom. And when you kind of like extrapolate that to culture, that's actually what happens with a culture. Like we had a garden and then we acquired a company. So suddenly not only do we have one garden, but now we have a different garden, and it might be completely different. So the question is, how do we get these gardens, to become, to follow like without losing their individuality? How do we get these gardens to connect? What are threads that are in common? And that's what we need, that's what as a company we need to work on. So like you were saying, culture is permanently evolving. The moment that you think that your culture is not going to change, I think that that's the moment where you lose, you start losing a competitive advantage in terms of your culture, because culture, just like a garden, it's an ever evolving thing. It's always changing. And like you were saying, people come in, people leave. Let me give you a great example that affected pretty much every single human being in the world. 3 years ago, we were here minding our own business, 3.5 years ago, and suddenly, boom, like COVID hit. And suddenly, like everybody had to start working remotely. And that affected the culture, because it's like, how do you communicate with people? How do you have water cooler conversations? If there's no water cooler because everybody went remote. And in our case, we went from having a beautiful 9,000 square foot office, 2 floors, industrial, ping pong table, badminton, PlayStations, you name it. It was phenomenal. Suddenly from one day to the other, we were all remote. How do you make sure that the culture copes with that? You need to invest in the culture. And when I say invest, it's not only resources, but mentally. You need to, it has to become a priority from the management team, from the leadership team. Like, hey, this change came in and we couldn't do anything about it. Now we need to deal with it. What are we going to do? And again, that's where the creativity toolbox comes very handy, because you say, well, hold on, let me open up my creativity toolbox. And when you open up your creativity toolbox, you realize that there's no limits. You can come up with whatever you want. That's what I love about being in business. Being in business, it's like there's a set of rules that you kind of like need to abide by. But then on top, besides those rules, you can do whatever you want. And then the cool thing is, it's very simple. It's actually pretty simple to realize if your strategies are working or not, because at the end of the day, it boils down, are you being profitable or not? And most of the time when you're being profitable, I remember I read this book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, from Ben Horowitz. And it was like, what my key takeaway was: people, product, profits. You take care of the people, and then, you take care of your people, and then your people take care of the product, and then your product generates profits. But it's got to be in that order. Now, when you go to most companies, it's the other way around. It's like, we need to make money, profits. And then if we have any money left over, we need to invest on the product. Boom. And then if we have any money left over, then we invest on the people. And I just think that it's, again, in my experience, it's just much better to flip that equation and start the other way. So that being said, investing in culture, and again, I used to have a business coach, John Hitler, up in San Francisco. And I remember that his whole thing was like, if you can't scale the culture, you can't scale the company. And that, when I met him, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, it kind of like sounded weird. Like, what is this guy talking about? But then you realize that's why I got to get 90 people, because, some of my competitors, they're 10 people strong. And it's just hard, because if you don't have a culture, you can't scale a team. You can't grow a team, because that's what culture, to me, like culture is how people behave when you're not around. And when you're up to 90, when you're 10 people, you're always there. You're always in communication. If you and I were on a team and it's 10 people, you and I can guarantee you, we're going to talk almost on a daily basis. But when you become 90 people strong, you and I, there's a huge chance that you and I might chat every couple of months. So it's like, how do I make sure that you're behaving in the way that we expect you to behave without me seeing what you're doing? That's defined as culture. So when companies don't invest in the culture, you risk of having people that are doing what you don't want to do. And it's not, of course, it's not fail safe, and it's not always going to work. But for the most part, it does work, and it has a phenomenally positive effect in the overall org. It's critical.
Yes, and I like the sentence you said: people, product, profit in that order. because
not the other way around.
Yes, exactly. And most people do it the other way around. And if you don't
That's what we're taught.
take care of your people, they actually don't really care about your profit anyway. They're just there to earn a paycheck and go home.
Yeah. And again, there's a guy called Peter Diamandis, and he's got a great book called Abundance: The Future Is Brighter Than You Think, or something like that.
Eat strategy for breakfast.
Yeah. So it's like, when you have an abundance mindset, it just changes everything. When you have a scarcity mindset, it's like scarcity is like, oh, we don't have enough. We need to make sure that we make all these things. And it's like, if we have anything left over, then we'll do something. But then if you have 20,000 left over, then it's not enough. It's got to be 100,000. But when it's 100,000, no, you want to have 300,000. And when it's 300,000, you want to have 1,000,000. So suddenly, when you operate from a scarcity mindset, it's never going to be enough. And try this out. I'm sure that you know both people that have an abundant mindset and a scarcity mindset, and just kind of like probe them a little bit, poke them around, and you're going to realize for the person that has a scarcity mindset, it's never enough. It's never enough money. It's never enough. It's never enough salary. It's never enough time. It's never enough of anything, right? For the people that have an abundance mindset, it's the other way around. So that's something. And again, the craziest thing, it's all about the mindset. Like especially when you're running a business. You've heard the expression, it's lonely at the top. So when you're running a business and it's like you have limited resources and and again you're surviving and stuff like that, how can you have an abundance? Like a lot of people ask me, like, how the hell do you have an abundance mindset when you're in survival mode? And that's the whole point. Again, you need to get creative. Like I have limited resources, but I want to, I have an abundant mindset. So it's like I'll give you the best analogy. Let's say I have 8 people in my team and we only have money for 1 pizza. Well, guess what? We order 1 pizza and it comes with 8 slices, and it's like 1 slice per person because that's it. Now suddenly things change, and you can order 2 pizzas, and it's 8 people. Well, guess what? You order 2 pizzas, or maybe things are great, and you order 4 pizzas, and it's the same 8 people. So now it's like half a pizza per person. So when you think about it that way, you were always able to give people their slice of pizza or half of the pizza. It doesn't matter, but the concept is that you're always thinking, how can I? Regardless of the number of people and the number of pizzas, how do I make sure that everybody gets, their fair share of whatever we're doing? And to me, that's kind of like an abundance mindset. And it changed the game.
Another good analogy there. And I also want to draw attention to the fact that when people are in survival mode, that is when the abundance mindset goes out the window. And ironically, that is the time when people need it the most. And that is true of a lot of people. When we need things the most, that's when it tends to go out the window. So the exercise, the eating well, all of it goes out of the window. So getting into the habit of almost coaching yourself through those periods, recognizing when you're in that survival mode and doing things that get you out of it. And I want to distinguish that from being stupid with money, right? So that doesn't mean I've got an abundance mindset, so I'm going to go spend £1 million that I don't have on something. No. But it's about using the resources you have. And that's why I like pizza analogy. You can still at least afford 1 pizza.
Exactly.
Even if you can't afford 8 pizzas.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So Alejandro, you're obviously someone that is deeply into the evolution and personal development journey. How have you invested in yourself as a leader? And what steps do you take to grow and evolve in your role?
That's a phenomenal question. And that's something that a lot of people forget. You start a business. I have friends and they run their business. But you know what? They invest 100% of their time in the business, and they invest 0% of their time on themselves. So like, what do I do? Like, number one, I'm an avid reader. You read 1 book, nothing changes. 10 books, you might get a couple of different insights. You read 100 books, life changes. You read, 200 books, 300 books plus, you're a different type of human being. It's that simple. So it's like reading. Think about it. You take a book. I don't know. You take a book and somebody gives you a book and you read that book. And in that book, you might read a study, the book is the final study of somebody that spent their whole life exploring something, learning something, and they just put it on a book. And in a matter of hours, you can actually read that, and you can absorb all that knowledge from that person or that group of people that actually wrote that book. So reading is fundamental. Now, today I also use YouTube a lot, to learn, because again, when it comes to leadership and management, all these different things, sales, marketing, all these things, there's a lot of stuff that you can read. But when it comes to, say, right now I'm very into Bitcoin, which I discovered a few months ago, and I'm just I'm just I'm amazed by it, and AI, and those things are evolving so fast that you can't really use books, because books tend to be very, there's a whole, it comes in late in the process, right? So it's YouTube. There's a great, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'll listen right now. I'll listen to, I don't know, hours of podcasts a week, and it's like boom, boom, boom. So it's like, again, reading, listening to a podcast and watching, particularly watching. I've realized that I can learn faster by watching a podcast, because I can read the body language. I can read the lips. I can use closed captions. Therefore, I can normally, listen to podcasts at 2x, maybe 1.5, 2x, depending on who it is, but normally 2x. So you can actually absorb a lot of knowledge very, very fast. And then the other thing is, you need to get people to help you. You need to have a business coach. I've had multiple business coaches throughout my life, and then not only business coaches, but I used to have a part-time CFO. Now I have a full-time CFO, but before I used to have a part-time CFO, I used to have a business coach, multiple business coach. And then I joined a group called Vistage. Vistage is a worldwide organization, which is a peer CEO network. So believe it or not, I go to Vistage. I live between the States and Colombia, but I go to Miami every month, particularly Boca Raton, every month for my Vistage meeting. And some people question me, like, why would you fly, and travel all that long to go to a one-day meeting? And it's like, because you know what, those meetings, they changed my life. If I wasn't a member of Vistage, I wouldn't have sold my business. And the only reason I sold my business is because somebody, we were in this presentation, and somebody was talking about the best timing to sell a business based on the economic, conditions, all these different things. And he looked at me and said, Alejandro, when are you going to sell your business? And I said, no, man, I'm never going to sell my business. It's my passion. It's my hobby. I have too much fun. I love it. Bah, 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 bah. And one of my friends, who had taken a, older than I am, but he had taken a company public, like, I don't know, like for $1 billion or something like that. He looked at me and said, like, hey, man, he was like, hey, Alex, I challenge that assumption. You should think about selling your business, having a liquidity event, and doing whatever you want for the rest of your life. And again, new piece of information came in, and I said, hey, this makes sense. Companies, that's why you have legal entities. You have people. I can't, I can only be myself, and I can only own myself. But then if I have a company, I can actually sell my company to Sarah, and then Sarah can have it for a couple of years, and then Sarah can, sell it to Joe or to another company, whatever. So that moment when that information came in, guess what I started doing? If my company was a rope and me was a separate rope, all these ropes were entangled, right? One big ball. And that day I started, separating the ropes, boom, 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 boom. And it took me a while, maybe, I don't know, 6 months. But you know what? 6 months to a year after that conversation, I was very clear. I am me, and my company is my company. And eventually I'm going to sell my business. And all those, and again, that's just one example of the dozens of things that I've learned from going to those groups. So the other thing that I learned in those groups is you learn to be vulnerable. You learn to kind of, like, in front of a group of, very accomplished individuals, saying like, hey, I suck at this. And I'm having a real challenge with this. What can it, and it's making me feel angry or scared or whatever. And suddenly you realize that being able to talk about how you feel and expressing your vulnerabilities in front of other human beings, that's just a hard skill set. It's just something that you need to, learn. So all those things. So when you think about it, and then here's the kicker. So like the cool thing is I'm 44, right? So I've been around for a while, right? So, and I've been in business for the last 20 years. So now I can actually start seeing the effect. Okay, great. So I know a lot of people, and I know people that in the last 20 years, they haven't read a single thing, none. And I have people that they haven't, besides when they graduate from school, they haven't done anything, for them. And then you kind of like look at where they are and all that stuff, and you go like, oh man, that kind of sucks, And then again, I love paying it forward. So I talk to people that I know, younger, whatever, and I just tell them like, listen, read. And people go like, well, I don't have time. And it's like, do you realize that if you read 15 minutes a day, it'll add up to about 90 hours a year? And if let's say you're an average reader and you read, I don't know, a book in 10 hours, that means that you can read 9 books in a year. Oh, but it's only 9 books. Yeah. But think about it this way. If I started doing that 20 years ago and I read 9 books a year, today I would have 180 books in my, in my repertoire, in my toolbox. So small changes. Here's the other thing that's great. And I think I saw it on Twitter the other day. The effect of small changes. So one, So let's say you're doing 1 and you don't do anything. 1 to the power of 365 is 1. Nothing changes. But it's slightly changed. 1.01. That's 1%. 1.01. Every single day you get a little 1% better at whatever you're doing. 1.01 to the power of 365. If you do that on the calculator, you know what you're going to get? 37 point something, 38. So it's like, if you make small changes every single day, those end up accounting to huge changes. Most people are sitting there thinking like, oh, I need to get my lucky break. And at least in my life experience, the lucky break, it's not one big thing that happens. The lucky break is hundreds, if not thousands of small things that you do to get you to where we want to go. And it gets to a point that I'll give you a great analogy. You have a bucket and suddenly it's like, hey, Sarah, I need to fill this bucket with water. And you go to whatever you're going to get the water. And it's like, oh man, it's like a drip, beep, beep. And you go like, oh my God, this is terrible. And it's like, most people are impatient, so they're not going to get any water. And you start running around, whatever. Or you could have said like, you know what? I'm going to practice a little patience and I'm going to stay here for, maybe I'll leave the bucket and I'll check it out in 2 hours. And then you come back 2 hours later and you realize that, a tenth of the bucket is full. So then you say like, well, I'm going to come back in the evening. And then you come back in the evening and you realize that the bucket is full. And that's the whole point. I mean, it's like in my personal experience, success comes from pushing small changes consistently, doing a lot of experiments. Now, are those changes going to work? No. Out of 10 changes that I implement or 10 experiments, maybe 1 or 2 work. In some cases, you get lucky, maybe 3. But so 78, 9 fail. So what do? Most people will say, well, if I'm going to do 10 things and 9 are going to fail, I might as well not do anything. I kind of have a different approach. If I see that if I do 10 experiments and 9 fail, you know what I do? I do 100 experiments, because then 10 are going to work. Or I do 1,000 experiments because then 100 are going to work. And then when you do 1,000 experiments and 900 failed, but 100 worked, those 100 experiments that work, it's going to push you to the other side. And that's what you got to do. It's just, you got to keep pushing. Again, I think that everybody has a different story. I'm just sharing my story and what's worked for me. And it's a lot of persistence. It's a lot of, again, go into the bucket and sure, it's a little drop. But yeah, it's when we started charging transaction fees in our business, it accounted for nothing. It was like a tiny fraction. It was like nothing. And we kept going and going and going. And customers were like, oh, it's never going to work. People are not going to do that, yada, yada, yada. And we kept pushing. Fast forward to today, transaction fees account for, 30% of our revenue, 35% of our revenue. And it has explosive growth because transaction fees, there's no cap. If you pay me $1,000 a month to use my platform, that's it. You're paying me $1,000 a month. But if I start monetizing your payments and some other digital channels or whatever I invent, suddenly guess what? Your $1,000 a month account can become a $5,000 a month account or a $10,000 a month account. And you're happy because you're paying me based on a success. It's a fee based on success. I'm not charging you more. It's like if I'm charging you 10 grand and I'm charging you $9,000 in transaction fees and you come back to me and you balk at me or whatever, my response to you is going to be like, have you noticed how much money we've helped you make? Have you noticed how much we've helped your business grow? And when you realize that, you go like, oh man, it's actually pretty cheap. Don't change it. I love paying what I'm paying. So value, people, human beings are very happy to give you their money in exchange for value, real value. That's what I discovered. When you are able to harness and create real value for other people and you solve real problems, people will willfully and happily give you their money. That's just the way that it works. That's why you pay for the tools. That's why you pay for Zoom, because you get so much value from Zoom that you say, hey, I'm willing to spend $49 a month or whatever you pay for Zoom, because the value that I get from Zoom is way higher than the perceived value that I'm spending, the money that I'm spending on Zoom.
Yes, to highlight that point, you offer value to people and people are not going to question that. So also in terms of communicating, being able to very clearly communicate what that value is, which sometimes you have to do when people are questioning transaction fees and they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. And the other thing that you said that I want to highlight is the small steps point. So a lot of people don't even start doing things because they're like, I've got this big goal, it's too overwhelming, so I'm not even going to start. There are so many books written on the power of small habits. So Atomic Habits is
Atomic Habits, yep.
And if you implement small things done consistently, they add up over time much more than inconsistently doing large things.
Random things, exactly. Not to mention that every time you want to change something, it generates friction. There's friction. There's inertia. People, human beings, most human beings tend to like to do things the way that they've been doing them for many, for whatever period of time. And then I'll give you an example. We implemented credit card payments on our platform, and the transactions went from involving 4 people and taking, I don't know, an hour, to involving 1 person and taking, literally seconds. And it was still a hard sell, especially for the people in accounting, because it's like, oh, but it's like, I know how to do this. It's 10 steps, but I know them by heart. And in this case, it's like 1 step, but it's like no. So it's like, you need to kind of like identify those things so that you can actually reduce the friction, because it's just hard as human beings. When you think about, even in a company, like let's say you implement a CRM, we're big Salesforce users, and most of the companies that I know, they don't use Salesforce or a CRM. And when they do, they use it poorly. And part of the reason is their implementation sucks. And part of that, and then you start wondering, like you apply the 5 whys, like from the Japanese, like the 5 whys, so you get to the bottom of it. And it ends up being that people don't use a CRM because they don't see the value. So suddenly it's like, oh, I'm going to use a CRM. Why? Well, because Sarah said so. Because Sarah has a friend that uses a CRM, and she came to the office and she said that we needed to start using a CRM. So like nobody buys into that. So I remember, I don't know, man, 15 years ago when we implemented, I've been using Salesforce since 2005, but when we implemented it the last time, like probably like 15 years ago, 12 years ago, I remember that I bought the licenses. We were like 12 licenses or 15. And then I realized like, oh man, I forgot to kind of like involve the team. So then I got the team together. We were small at that point, like 50 people at most. And I said, hey, man, like we have this challenge. Like if I wanted to call Sarah, my customer, like how do I find her contact information? It's like, who has it? Like where do we store it? And I started asking these questions until somebody from the team said, hey, you know what? I used to work in this company, and we had like this CRM, and it used to be called Salesforce, and it's like, oh my God, we had all this stuff there. And I was like, really? So how does it work? And then suddenly you get the team excited. And then, after you get the team excited, I said like, well, should we try, getting something like Salesforce and testing it out? And the team was like, hell yeah, we want to give it a shot. I had already bought the licenses, but you know what? Check this out. So now I go in, and I don't know, the next day I said, hey team, to announce that here's the licenses, here's we're going to use it, boom, boom, boom. And then everybody kind of like chipped in, as opposed to, good morning, everyone. I spoke with my friend Sarah, and as of now, everything that you do has to be recorded in the CRM because Sarah said that it was great. WIFM, what's in it for me? Human beings operate under the WIFM. So you know what? There's no WIFM. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to use it. That's where most implementations fail. But in our case, the team knows that when you use our CRM, you have the ability to you can harness the collective power, the brain power in the company. So somebody goes in, they have a conversation. I just got an email this morning. We have a prospect and they want to use some whatever. And I saw the person doing the proof of concept sharing the notes on Salesforce and saying, at Alejandro, what are your thoughts on this? At executive team, here's a great opportunity. At implementation team, I have the following questions. And you know what? I have a conversation, or anybody from the team has a conversation with a customer. And then as soon as they hang up and they write the notes, they can harness the collective power of the company because we use that. So when people understand that, guess what? Everybody uses it. We don't have to tell people, well, remember that if you call Sarah, you have to record the notes. You don't have to tell them. They do it automatically because they know that when they do that automatically, they need help, whatever. Guess what? There's a mechanism that allows them to harness the collective power of the company. And that's really, really powerful. So you need to get people, involved in those things so that they can actually happen.
People only make change if they have a say in that decision. So if there is a clear collective benefit, and just to go back on what you said, if I tell you to do something and you do not see the value or the point of doing it, or even if you do, you need to come to that conclusion of yourself. I actually need to change this, and I want to change this. Exactly.
But again, when you think about it, as a leader, you always have to be thinking about the WIFM. And again, the WIFM, it's just human nature. I mean, there's a great book that everybody should read, Influence by Robert Cialdini. It's a book about psychology, and it just gives you like all these. Again, that's why reading gives you an edge. You go to a meeting, and I go to a meeting, and I've read countless books about psychology and human behavior and body language and all those different things. So you go to a meeting, and in many cases, especially when I was selling and I was traveling, especially to the US selling the platform, I would normally walk into especially a larger company, and I would sit on my own, and suddenly I would sit on a table with 10 other people from the business. So it's 10 against 1. It's like you're massively outnumbered. So suddenly it's like you have to quickly read the room and realize like who's with me, who's unsure, and who's against me. And you know how you can actually tell really quick? Body language. So again, when you read about body language and you learn all these different things, you start learning tactics like mirroring. You start talking to somebody and they're connected with you, and suddenly you I don't know, you take this position, and suddenly you see 2-3 people unconsciously taking this position. Guess what? Like, okay, great. So Joe, Jeff, and I don't know, and Joanne, I mean, they're on my side. I get them right away. And then you see the other people, and they're like kind of like whatever. And then you see some people like frowning, like with their arms like this. Like, okay, great. So Al is totally against me, whatever. So it's like again, it's like you against the people, but then suddenly you start reading the room. So as I'm making conversations, and then you start picking up what people are saying, and then what you start doing is it's like playing chess. It's like suddenly somebody says something, and then you realize that person's in favor, but the other person's against, but the other person has a concern that that you already addressed, and you have to kind of like flip the conversation so that the person that's with you kind of like supports what you're trying to say without you saying it. They support it, and that's kind of like the argument that you need to convince the other person that's sitting like this. And again, it's a game. At the end of the day, here's the deal. You have to treat this as a game, because when you treat this as a game, it's fun. If you love playing, I don't know, Monopoly, if you love playing Monopoly and you and I sit down and we're playing Monopoly, you're having fun. It doesn't matter, something you're going to win, something you're going to lose. It doesn't matter. It's about playing the game. I'll tell you something. To me, it's always been, I read this, I don't know, years ago, decades ago. It's about the journey, not the destination. And people tend to forget that. And I'll give you an example. If all you do is work to have an exit, for example, in my case, it took me 19 years to have an exit. So if I only worked, having horrible times just because I was thinking of my exit, think about it for a second. I would have lived 19 years of my life not having fun, and then suddenly have an exit. How long does the happiness of the exit last? A day, a week, 2 weeks. 2 weeks after you close the deal, life goes on. It's nothing changed. Sure, you have more money in the bank account, but besides that, nothing changes. So to me, it's about how do you enjoy the journey? How do you play the game? And again, going to a meeting where the odds of you closing the deal are 1 in 50, and you still have the balls and the guts to sit down in front of a group of people and kind of like, pull these levers and try this, try that. And eventually, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But that's the whole point. It's about having fun. It's about being passionate about what you're doing. It's about being passionate about changing people's lives, not only your team's lives, because of what you're doing and their compensation, all these things, but your customers' lives, the companies that are actually adopting your software. And it's like, we just had a show in Bogota 3 weeks ago, and multiple people approached me like, hey, Alejandro, thank you and your team for what you're doing. Because of what you guys have, it's radically changed my life, my business. I get goosebumps. That's what it's all about. And what happens is, when you apply capitalism, when you solve problems, you are rewarded by the system, for your contributions. That's what people forget. Capitalism is beautiful. I mean, sure, like everything, it's got some negative things and whatever, but for the most part, it's a great game, because it allows you to play a game. And if you learn how to play the game, and if you invest in yourself and you become good at that, you can actually win. And by the way, when you win, it doesn't mean that you win and other people lose. Like, I've always had this mentality with my competitors, for example. We're the only company that has reached out to pretty much every single competitor that we have and say, listen, Sarah, I realize that you and I have a mutual customer. And I was thinking that even though we compete, what about we integrate our system so that we can actually add more value to our mutual customer? And people go like, really? Like, yeah. And then go like, well, you and I can compete to make our slice bigger. But if I compete to make my slice bigger, what happens is, by definition, everybody's slices is going to get smaller. But here's the difference. Instead of me focusing on making my slice bigger, I focus on making the overall pie bigger. As the pie grows, not only is my slice going to grow, but your slice is also going to grow. And when you have that mentality, again, abundance mindset, when you approach people with that mentality, guess what? Our competitors, we integrate with our competitors, and we generate a lot of revenue, not only for us, but for them, because we've had this conversation. So again, if you treat it as a game and you enjoy every single moment of it, then it's just very different. And that's what I would encourage people that are in business. Forget about, sure, it's great having an exit, and if that's what you want to have, aim for that. but never forget that it's about the journey and not the destination. That to me is the most critical thing.
And that's a really good note to end on. Treat this as a game and have fun on the journey. It's not about the destination. Thank you, Alejandro, for all your insights today and some extremely good analogies as well.
Happy to share. I mean, that's the whole point. At the end of the day, we come to this world, and I'm very focused on paying it forward, because you know what? I've learned so much from so many people, and so many people have extended me their help and their hand, and all these sorts of different ways. So it's like the last thing. I mean, I think that the least that you can do is again share your story and try to inspire other people, and try to let other people know that, hey, you push hard and you apply these different things, and you play the game. You can eventually make it. You can actually win, whatever winning means for you, having a business, having an exit, whatever it means. But again, have fun, enjoy life. You never know, we might life is just it's a lease. We're all here on a short lease, and here's the kicker: nobody knows when your lease is going to end, so you might as well treat every single day as it's your last day. And I know that sounds, it's a little cliche, but that's just the way. When you do it like that, things change. The world, there's a different, you have like a different vision of the world. So anyways, food for thought.
I couldn't agree more. And to my listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as well. If you would like to take part in the Leading in the Modern Way interview series, please do reach out to me. Bye for now.